it.
Okay.
We should get a little note saying this meeting is being recorded.
It looks like it's recording.
It is recording now. Okay, Ros, over to you.
Well, I'll just quickly introduce Ros, actually. So welcome, Ros Coward, and thank you very much for agreeing to speak for us. And particular thanks, because I think that without you, we wouldn't have as many markers on the map or as many supporters and members and people being aware of it, because you were the first person with this article here across the UK. Environmental protest is surging, so why don't we hear about it? And you mentioned the map, and that was very early on, back in March, I think. And from then we got a surge of interest. And again, NIMBYs are not selfish. We're just trying to stop the destruction of nature. I think probably everyone listening would agree with that sentiment. So, so huge thank you for those 2 articles and raising awareness of our map. And yeah, so Ros is a journalist and writer, emeritus professor of journalism at Roehampton University and a former member of the board of Greenpeace UK. And she's here tonight to tell us how to deal with the press. So over to you, Ros. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm very conscious, I recognise some of the names of people whose campaigns I've been really impressed by. So I think there are some of you are going to find perhaps this initially a little bit obvious, because you've all had to become experts with your own campaigns. And and the Community Planning Alliance is an example of doing incredible work of contacting the media and beginning to become a very sort of strong force in it. So I do feel as if I may be talking about things that you've already had to learn the hard way, but hopefully in the discussion afterwards.
Could everybody mute themselves, please, because of some feedback? Thank you.
Yeah,
sorry,
so
Ros.
I'm hoping that we'll have a good discussion after I finish talking, but let's see. I think I was going to say a bit about my own experience as a journalist, because it is relevant to what we're talking about. Is anyone else still getting that feedback?
Yeah, I am.
Yes, just give me a second, Ros. What I'm going to do is mute everybody and then I'll unmute you.
Okay.
Ros, can you try and unmute yourself, because it isn't letting me unmute you.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds better.
All right, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yes, I was going to say that my, a lot of my work in journalism was on as a comment and feature writer for The Observer first and then The Guardian. And that was sort of, The Guardian in particular was sort of between about 1994 and 2010, where I was writing regular comment pieces and features. And because I was trying, particularly at the beginning of that period, to push sort of environmental issues, things like overfishing was still a new subject, recycling, plastic pollution. And I became a kind of someone to whom various environmental NGOs turned to and put their stories. So I know very much what it is like to be on the receiving end, as well as trying to write about these subjects. I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of campaign groups and NGOs trying to get their cause covered. So I think that I've got some experience of both sides, as it were. and still last year, as Rosie said, I focused on, I still do write columns much more occasionally for The Guardian. I don't have a contract anymore. But last year I decided I wanted to really tackle this issue of what was happening to the countryside. You know, I could see that the sum total of all the different parts was just so massive, the damage that was happening. And but it may, you know, it may reassure you that those of you who are struggling to get coverage, that actually, you know, it's difficult even for journalists themselves to get through the kind of barrier of resistance on this subject. And it was quite hard for me to get these subjects in. You have to be extremely inventive of coming up with new angles, new you know, new information, something surprising. So I think it, you know, that has been what I think it's important to know is that I think there is resistance to this subject, genuine resistance. I don't know if any of you, I mean, I imagine you've all had the experience of sending out press releases, contacting journalists, contacting editors, trying to get your campaign getting attention, and being rebuffed or disappointed. But I think there is real resistance, and that's to some extent what I was trying to write about in those articles, which is that there is a dominant narrative, which is that you know, that so that the subject of planning and the kind of, you know, campaigns that are addressing planning issues and local protests, they are seen as being, you know, they're seen by the dominant narrative as being kind of, you know, you're all familiar with the language of NIMBYism, that development is a sort of force for good, that housing is necessary, that people who oppose it are, you know, are only concerned about the view from their back garden. So it is hard work for, you know, for you to get through, and it's also hard work for journalists who take up the cause, because, you know, one of the things that maybe you're not so familiar with, that to some extent journalism is has its own internal market. So it's not just that editors commission a piece on a tree occupation and send out a reporter. In fact, what happens is often the reporters themselves and feature writers are bringing forward ideas, and with a comment writer as well, you have to persuade your section editor that this subject is worth or will fit in with the overall section aims of that day, and it's all moving very quickly. It's like a moving jigsaw puzzle. So actually, you know, it's difficult within the media organizations themselves sometimes. So I think this is why, you know, why it's important to, why getting a good pitch, getting through that noise, that moving jigsaw puzzle, why you really need to sort of have a kind of approach to the press that really stands out, and you can make a difference in how you pitch it, whether your pitch gets through the sort of cacophony of journalism. And again, that leads on to the sort of second reason. So there's a sort of dominant narrative with a resistance inbuilt to that, but there's also the fact that journalists are fantastically busy in being bombarded with, you know, different, you know, all these different, imagine all these different campaigns, all contacting the same editor, along with every other issue imaginable. So they're under sort of constant pressure themselves as to what they're going to pick up on and whether or not the story is going to deliver fast enough or meet their own constraints. So again, you know, you've got to do something that sort of stands out and, you know, grabs the attention and wins them over. And there are a number of ways in which you can do that. But I'm starting with this one. Oh gosh, sorry, Rosie, would you mind opening the link? Can you do that?
I can try. Probably
You just have to click on it, and it should say link and then open link.
it might be because it's in. There we go.
Yeah.
Should double click.
Okay, and can you scroll down? I included this because I don't know if any of you saw it, but it's kind of almost like the dream coverage, you know, which is even before, you know, quite early on in the campaign with a road plan in, I think it's Shropshire, gets this massive coverage for the tree, a really good long report. It's written by Patrick Barkham, who's a well-established nature writer. It is probably the sort of coverage that all campaigns dream of. So the question is, you know, has that come about because there's a magic formula, and that if you get it right, you know, you too can get that coverage? Well, the answer to that is no, because I just happen to know the story behind that, which is that the campaign, a sort of well-known prominent journalist on The Guardian, her sister is involved in the campaign. Her sister contacted the journalist and asked what she could do. She contacted her friend and colleague, Patrick Barkham. Together, they put pressure on the environment editor to have it covered. So it was covered. So this is not to depress you, but simply to say, you know, that actually, you know, if you happen to have any contacts like that, if you happen to know you have journalists in your area, if you happen to know anyone in the media who has any contact of that kind, just milk them for all they're worth. I mean, in fact, this was actually rather, in some ways, although it's the dream article, in some ways it was disappointing because it didn't mention all the other campaigns, the fact that this is part of something that is happening all over. So although it got very good coverage, it didn't take the opportunity to contribute to sort of dispelling that, what I'm calling the dominant narrative, that actually these kind of protests are just local and not of general interest. So as I say, there's no magic formula, but there is there is good practice. So to do a this is my Chris Whitty moment. Next slide, please. Can we go back to slide 3? Back, yeah. Okay. Okay, so there's no there's no magic formula, but there are some good practices, and I'm going to be talking in a slightly not particularly logical order, but in a way of different kind of good practices that you can develop to actually improve your contact with the press and your chances of getting coverage. And the first one is to that actually keep an up-to-date list and use it. Keep a list that is of the environment editors, the journalists who write about these issues, both local and national. I can supply a basic one if anyone wants to have it, which I. But you should be able to kind of deduce contacts. If you can't find them immediately, you can deduce them from the general standard format, email format from media organizations. So, and this is, as probably some of you have worked in communications, all good press offices keep up-to-date lists of who's dealing with their areas. There's no point sending a press release to, you know, completely irrelevant section. Don't be disheartened if emails bounce back. There's quite a lot of change goes on in journalism. Just you know, try and research. It's quite easy to research and find out who's the environment editor, or you can just ring the media organizations. They're perfectly open to, you know, if you get the switchboard, they'll tell you who to talk to. Incidentally, apologies for my croaky throat. But I'm talking about email here, but obviously a lot of journalists do use Twitter, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that later. But you know, for some editors like Damien Carrington, the overall editor of the Guardian Environment, he's very accessible. He keeps an open access on Twitter, so you can actually contact him directly. You should sort of, it helps to, you know, as I say, not only a list of editors, journalists, but also comment writers. I think comment writers, you know, and that's something that I did, are very, very useful for campaign causes. And sometimes campaigns don't think of that. But actually enlisting a comment writer allows you to have a much stronger opinion on what's happening. It's not just reported, because you know, as you know, with journalism, that journalists are meant to sort of cover both sides and give a fair voice to, you know, usually the developers or HS2 or whoever. But with an opinion writer, you can have a much stronger take on it, who can actually take your side and argue it, and that can be very influential. And there are certainly, you know, writers like Gabby Hinscliffe and Simon Jenkins, people on The Guardian, who do touch on these issues. And you should also sort of, you know, when you approach them, it's worth trying to sort of make the links for people. I've noticed that you cover this, or you wrote about blah. You know, this is the same kind of issue, only it's even more so, or whatever your particular angle is going to be. So you can personalize when you make contact. It can help to personalize. I know this all takes time, but it is kind of worth that effort. And then, as you can see, you know, from the Patrick Barkham piece, cultivate any contacts that you have. And if anyone responds, keep them in the loop. Don't give up on people because they fail to get the piece in on one occasion. It doesn't mean to say that they've lost interest. It means probably that they weren't able to get it in because of the dynamics of the page, or what or other pressures coming from on top. And I think that you know, speaking from my experience on the comment pages, I really appreciated. I came to rely on certain kind of press officers or policy experts who contacted me, cultivated me. I came to be able to rely on them. I knew that the information was going to be good, it was going to come on time, that the stories were usually put to me in a really interesting way. And, you know, when you're under pressure yourself, with deadlines, with stories, with information, because there's always massive information, you know, it really helps if you've got people you can rely on and you've got to know. So it's worth the kind of playing the long game of getting to know people, trying to involve them, trying to get them to come and see what you're doing, you know, sending them information, keeping the story warm. Okay, can we go to the next one? Okay, so another important thing is make sure you target your community, your media outlet. I mean, there are different kind of expectations, obviously, for local and national. You need different press releases for them. Again, it takes time, but you know, it's worth it, because you can, these days, the local press is so short-staffed and so lacking in resources that you can actually pretty much write a story for the local papers if you target it in a way that's immediately in their style, covering the subjects that they're interested in, whereas so they would be very different from how you would approach a national newspaper. So, for example, you know, if it's local, it can be truly local. So you can say, you know, you could have donkey sanctuary threatened by new road, but that would be of no interest whatsoever for a national paper, which would have to have you would have to have a kind of something with national implications, and this would be an example that you know, you could have new road will destroy ancient landscape or cultural monument, or a link to a national news agenda. But you'd have to kind of, you know, make your story or your campaign, you'd have to kind of indicate for the national papers and press what, you know, what is of national interest. Okay, so can we have the next one? Okay, I think I don't know how you value the local press, but and I imagine that all of you recognise its importance, but there can be this sort of sense that the real achievement is to get national coverage, but local media is incredibly important. You know, it's about who you need to influence, and you're influencing different people with different outlets. And a lot of the work of getting something into the local media is to generate to get over what's happening, to recruit people to an awareness of the damage that's being done, to encourage people to put pressure on their local councillors and MPs, to some extent, you know, put pressure on those councillors and MPs yourself by the story. So it is very important, and not only is it important for that reason, it's important because, you know, actually it becomes a really useful, you know, a useful way of using that story. You can use the local story to go to the national and say it's been covered here, but this is the wider issue. I mean, I'm just, you know, I think an example of this, I spend quite a lot of time in Whitstable because my partner has a house there, and I've been involved in a few campaigns there and around the Kent coast, which I'll talk a bit about. But, you know, there was a young journalist, and this is typical of the local press, a young journalist came, you know, who did her first story on a kind of some unfortunate, some really bad development that was going on with oyster production. And she wrote a piece that was entirely from the point of view of the developer. And, you know, the campaign contacted her, got her down to come and look at what was going on, really worked on her and made her feel thoroughly guilty about sort of, you know, not having listened properly to the campaign. And ever since then, she's been doing really very good, much more sort of sympathetic coverage. So you can really access the local journalists. And a lot of them are very young and inexperienced, and, you know, have found themselves doing every single subject under the sun. So it really, again, helps if you can provide the stories, give them reliable information, give them a press release that they can almost use as it is. There's also an aspect of the local media, again, I don't know if you can open this, Rosie, that getting great national coverage, again, doesn't necessarily win the cause. You know, it's this was a massive solar farm which will be built, unfortunately, because the campaign was lost. It got this coverage. Could you scroll down a bit?
Yeah.
It got some very good coverage in the Daily Mail, which has got, you know, they actually did their own graphics to demonstrate just how much of the land would be lost, what the batteries would look like. You know, you couldn't have hoped for better coverage, which you would have thought would, but you know, it didn't make a crucial difference. It was slightly too early, this coverage, and the campaign slightly lacked. It was too local. It had this national coverage, but in terms of locality, it concentrated on much too small an area, and it didn't win. I mean, it's something maybe we'll come back to in the discussion about, you know, why that campaign lost, because it's such an obvious one that shouldn't have lost, because it's very precious. It's very precious area of marshland. You know, but actually, whether or not enough was done to kind of recruit the major NGOs into supporting it. There was a lot of ambivalence about the solar farm. But I think, you know, it's kind of as I say, it's an example of, you know, the important thing about the press is, who are you trying to get to? What are you trying to achieve with it? And that can affect whether or not it's local or national. I mean, the perfect thing is where you've got both working together. Yes, but I think once you have, as I say, once you've got local coverage, it can be used to build into a sort of national. It becomes something that other journalists can pick up. Again, I was involved in the campaign to save York Gardens, which was a campaign to protect a black poplar tree from being felled, and it was very hard to get public attention. It was seen as being much too small a kind of campaign, an issue. But eventually, they managed to get a very young journalist from the South London Press online, who came and did a good piece, spent time with the camp, did a very nice sort of graphic description of it all, and talked also to a woman, you know, an older woman who decided to camp out for the night. And with the protesters, a therapist, you know, sort of perfect media material in a way. An older woman with who slept out beside the busy York Way, and this young journalist put it in, did quite a long piece, because online you're not so restricted with length. And it got picked up by BBC London, you know, who were able to use some of that information, and then that piece could be used again, going for other press releases. So it's a kind of snowballing effect. Okay, can we go on? Yes. So I think I don't need to do that. Yeah. So I'm going back to kind of what might capture people's attention. What is it that interests, particularly the nationals, although the locals are a kind of, you know, they're a sort of small scale version of the same thing. It's the same news values to some extent. And the kind of the usual things that attract the usual things that guarantee something gets into the news is something news happened. There's a news statistic. There's something surprising. There's something that directly affects our quality of life. It's usually seen as, does it affect your pocket, your finances? But increasingly, I think things that affect well-being, health, such as pollution, use of chemicals, etc. The activities of famous people and what the elite get up to, and the issues and events relating to the wider political picture, elections. So, by and large, and of course, there's sort of human interest. So there are kind of, human stories about birth and marriage, divorce, all those sorts of things. But for our purposes, to a large extent, unless the story can get pitched as newsworthy, it's not going to get in the news. So can we go on to the next two? Rosie has provided this this one, which is it's, I don't know if people saw it at Kent, but Faversham, another blow to Kent, not just Graveney Marshes and all the other housing developments going on, but another huge sort of Poundbury proposal. But this gets coverage. This is the Daily Mail again, because it's, it can be pitched into the sort of the toffs don't care about us, and if you could go on to the next one as well. Again, oh, no, not that one. Go back to, no.
Oh, this one. It is this one. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So this is another one, say in the same theme. There are certain themes and preoccupations that some of the kind of tabloid press have. And the Daily Mail's has got this theme about, the elite just doing what they want, sort of thing. So it becomes sort of, there's a way into that kind of coverage. Can you go on? Yeah. I mean, the thing is, news values do change, and I think we're at a moment now where we're seeing themes that wouldn't have normally got coverage, but which you can get some traction for with the campaigns that you're involved with. So, for example, sewage and pollution is something that's now interesting to the papers. Rewilding is of interest. There's coverage of rewilding projects. There's interest in the political ramifications of home county protest. Sorry for the spelling mistake. Particularly after what happened in Chesham and Amersham. There's coverage of climate change and what is actually happening. Possibly, I don't know what other people think, but I do think loss of biodiversity is getting more attention. And The Guardian has recently taken on 2 biodiversity correspondents, which I think is a sign, certainly, of that paper taking an interest. There's more attention to things like, the existence of wildlife havens and the threat to them. Information about ancient trees, information about rivers. So there is more interest. That gives a wider way in. Things don't have to be quite as restricted. And I think just more generally, the kind of resistance is still there because the dominant narrative is still there, but there are signs that that dominant, that there are more themes by which we could sort of challenge challenge that. Although what I really want to see more of is more coverage of the challenge to, I mean, exactly what the Community Planning Alliance is doing is challenging, the kind of biodiversity net gain algorithm, or the housing algorithms, the general assumptions that have driven this destruction of the countryside. So I just want to do very quickly before I end is just go through a few practical things. So if we can go to the next one. These, as I say, are just some sort of tips that, journalists want to get their story in a nutshell, and they can't wade through pages of detail. So you should keep your press releases as short as possible. Try to keep it to A4, one page of A4 size. And that's because, there's so much arriving on the desk of national media, but at the opposite end, the local journalists are having to do everything. So they don't want to wade through things. So capture the main points of the story on one page, and any necessary complicated details, if there's information that has to be had about what the planning application is, what the details of it are, put those in as background information in endnotes, so that the information is there, but it doesn't stop the journalist getting the story in one go. Okay, if you could, as I say, it's an opportunity as well, because you can, in effect, especially for local papers, write the stories. Okay, make sure you do a good headline and open the press release with the main point in summary. So you want to write good headlines that grab attention, like, for example, NEP estate rewilding plans threatened by vast housing estate. And make sure the opening pretty much says it all. Journalists are taught to get, that what you learn as a journalist is that you have to kind of say in the first paragraph the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. And to some extent, you should think of a press release doing the same, very quickly summarizing what the main story is, and then slightly elaborating it and giving context. Okay. Quotes are really important in press releases because they give color, and they bring a cause to life, and they tell you what matters to the individuals involved. And it's actually where you can put over strong opinions about what's going on. You don't have to just sort of say be a kind of objective at this point. You can insert strong opinion from people who are really feeling strongly about it. And you shouldn't use quotes for conveying facts. But because quotes are doing something different, what they're telling, in the case of the local papers, they're probably going to get used. If they're a great quote, they'll probably just get used like that. Or in terms of nationals, a journalist will think, oh, there's going to be a great interview possible. There's somebody, or there are people here who've got great quotes, and quotes are really important to journalism. Okay. I think this is really important. I've noticed that quite often press releases don't offer someone to speak to the press. And actually, it's really vital that you have someone for your campaign who's prepared to put their phone number down, to give, to answer questions, to give a quote, And sometimes it's at very inconvenient times, you know, you're going to be rung in the evening maybe, but it's really worth it because journalists want to quote real people, not a website. It's really a last resort if you have to go to a website and get the information you want. Okay. Just a few quick general points which are bringing to us close so that I can take your points. It's always worth anticipating the kind of criticism that you're going to get. So if someone, you know, if you imagine people are thinking, oh, well, it's all about affordable housing, it's worth preparing a kind of answer to that, not necessarily in your press release, but certainly for if you get interviewed or if you, and you should try and answer that. You should know the answer to the kind of thing, the opposition you're going to meet. I said I'd come back to Twitter, and I'm aware that I think I'm taking too much time. But Twitter is very, very important, and editors do, you know, they do become aware that something's happening and the kind of level of interest in it if you direct Twitter comments to them. And it is also quite a good way of contacting people. So I think Twitter, of all the social media, is the one that is most influential for journalism. By this, I noticed that Rosie was talking about setting up a professional website. I think that's important, that obviously you have to sort of play to your strength. And if you've got someone who's good on Twitter or someone who's good on Facebook or someone who's, you obviously have to play to your strengths in the campaign, but it's worth making sure that you do have at least a minimal website pointing you perhaps to Twitter if that's your sort of strong point, or vice versa, because you want to be able people to find you and get information. I mean, just to sort of think about different outlets, you know, it's not all, I mean, one story that's not, you know, that you can guarantee the national press aren't interested in, it's corrupt councils, but, you know, Private Eye is still interested in corrupt councils. And there are other sort of magazines and outlets that we don't always think about, like some of the wider political magazines like Standpoint, which is a centre-right one, New Statesman, you know, and some of the things like the wildlife magazines. I think, you know, I think we have to be very inventive. And I think, you know, also think about other means of communication, documentaries or blogs, Twitter threads. Lots of people host blogs like Mark Avery and Miles King. They both host guest blogs, and sometimes they're open to campaigners putting blogs on. So it's all about who you want to reach and what's the best way. I'm conscious. I've got just one example of a press release to end on, but have I exceeded the time? Are people sort of wanting to join in? And
why don't you very quickly talk about this, and then yes, let's open, because I think probably people are wanting to ask questions. So
yes. Okay, well, just very, very quickly, this is from this weekend, an incredibly successful protest that had over 1,000 people coming to it. But basically the press release, it's far too long. You know, it could be cut to sort of half this length. It's okay because it's, you know, it's mainly going to the local press, but it's got, you know, the title is, it doesn't need to say local swimmers who formed SOS Whitstable. We don't need to know that there. It could just be local swimmers. We already know it's Whitstable. The quotes are, I won't go into them, but the quotes are much too long and repetitive. Some of them give a great sense of what the people are going to be like to be interviewed further, but it is much too long. A journalist is going to really kind of just not have time for this. It's too busy. But then again, links, there's no one, if you look, there's no one, doesn't actually, for media inquiries, please contact info. So that's directing you to an email. Well, that's already slowing the process down. What a journalist needs at that point is a direct contact with someone who they can talk to. What it's good about is it's made links to the national kind of crisis around sewage at the moment, and it's also got good information links. So that's a good example. But so that's I thought that I would end on an interesting example of a press release that's got some things right and some things wrong. So I'll end there and apologise for having gone on too long, as it says in the middle.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ros. That was incredibly thorough, very helpful, and I wish I'd had something similar when I was starting out, actually, because there's so many useful tips in there. I like the who, what, when, where, why, the 5 W's. That's a useful one, and also sort of thinking about why you're doing it, who do you need to influence, and what your goal is. So there's some really good tips in there. Thank you. Now, how's the chat looking?
Yeah, quite a bit in the chat. And Paul, I can see that you've got your hand up. I think somebody else has, Dave, as well. But just before we go to the people with the hands up, I think we've got a couple of people in the chat who were talking about their experiences with local journalists. And Alistair had a poor experience, I think. You find them a bit depressing, Alistair. But Claire's had a good experience with her local journalists. So I just wonder whether it's worth asking Alistair and Claire to say a little bit about what they've seen, and then seen and heard, and perhaps you can give some feedback, Ros, on that, and then we'll come to questions if people can raise their hands. And if you don't know how to raise your hands, if you right click on your name in the participant list, you'll be able to raise your hand through the system. Okay, so Alistair, first, do you want to say a few words about the experience you've had with your local journalists?
Yeah, we have got things in the paper, so far that's quite good. But one thing I did observe is that it'll be down to this dominant narrative thing. Is the local authority always get the last word? So we're quite detail orientated. We try not to, I appreciate you. There's a downside to that, but I think we go into too much detail. And yeah, so, and I'm not sure we're believed. So they always seem to give the last word to the local authority, which is a bit depressing. Other things is, they do ask me my age always. I think it's that old NIMBY thing. But also, one thing you mentioned, Ros, was that it's good to have a nominated person. And I know one of my weaknesses is I'm not a compelling person on the phone. I'm really morose. So I don't give good copy. I appreciate that. So if we can find someone else to do it, that would be so much better.
Somebody who's upbeat. Well, Caroline had a great idea, which she's put in the chat, which is to bring her children in, so that it's not all the old NIMBYs on the line. So great idea, Caroline. So Claire, you've had a good experience, I think, with your local press, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, we contacted the Sheffield Star right in the early days, and I think remarkably, I think we've probably done a lot of what Ros suggested. We had succinct press releases, we quoted people, we tried to give a balanced we based it on facts and gave a balance, you know, oh, look what the developer's doing, this is really shocking. You know, we've always tried to, I mean, we're in the press again today, we're in the paper tonight, and it's all about showing an overhead of what has been destroyed, but saying, but look, this is still what we're fighting for. And she's written a great piece. It was online yesterday and it was in the paper today. And I think we met her just before COVID, and we kept in touch. And I think, I mean, it's the way I always do things. We're always polite. We always say please. We always thank her when she's written a story. And yeah, you know, she is busy, and she does get a lot of obviously a lot of people contacting her. But she, you know, what I think, once you've built that relationship up, I think she publishes everything that we send her now. So, and I think another key is not to push too hard, and, you know, don't expect to be in the paper every week, because that's just really not going to happen. And just taking Alice's point, you know, and Ros made the same point, they have to give a balanced view. I mean, the article that she'd just written was absolutely nothing to do with Avon Homes this time. It was about what we want to do to save the rest of the fields, but she actually went to them for a quote, and they are quoted in the article. So don't be disappointed when they put, you know, quotes from the other side in there. It's just the way that I think journalism works. Not being a journalist, but I think that's just, it has to be a balanced article. So
anything to add to that, Ros, before we go to questions? Oh, you're on mute, Ros.
Yeah, I think very interesting, both those points. And I mean, I absolutely agree that journalists do feel obliged to present the other side. You know, a good journalist does, although I have to say there are ways, you know, it is disappointing when they end and give the final word to the developers, because there are other ways they could do it. But I think they see themselves as doing their job. It's not that they're trying to discredit the opposition. I think one of the things that might be worth thinking about is sometimes when you're talking to them, and when, you know, when you're giving quotes, is maybe sometimes to try and anticipate those developer comments and get them in what you say, so that you've answered what they're likely to say before they get to it. But it's great to hear that you've got that good relationship, and I think they're really worth working on and getting that, you know, and particularly you've had a face-to-face encounter. It really helps if they come and see what they're talking about, and so that's great.
Okay, super. Well, let's go to the first question then. It's Paul Stanford. I think you had your hand up first, Paul. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, evening. Hi. Question to Ros, who's obviously done the presentation. I've mentioned, obviously, on the page, using the expression green wall, and also using target zero green belt for housing. As a journalist, you know, I mean, I hate to use him as an example, but Mr. Trump has used Make America Great Again, and he's also said he was going to build a wall, and I'm still not sure whether he did build a wall or not. But do you think that using certain expressions like the green wall, because we've got the red wall that the Conservatives are after, that ground in the north where I live now, so forget the London accent. Do you think these sort of buzz expressions are useful in every correspondence, Ros?
Unfortunately, I do think they are quite useful. You know, I think that it's the way things have been going in the media, and I think if you can capture, you know, if you can capture the cause in, or the issue in it's 3 words they normally like, don't they? You know, it can help. Unfortunately, I don't think we're quite there yet. I'm not sure about those particular ones. You know, where's the green wall?
Well, to me, Ros, is you know, I'm guessing most people here, you know, from what I've heard and making reference to the Guardian, that politics is to the left. Now, look, you know, whatever your politics, I think I think since COVID, I think everyone's realised how important nature is to them. You know, we've gone back to very basic things as human beings. And my reference to green wall is really for Mr. Gove, who you know, they're predicting there's going to be an election maybe in 2 years. Now, the Conservatives who are in power are after the red wall voters of the north where I live, you know. And they seem to have, they won the last election, you know, Boris did. And you know, there is, I don't think this group is made up just of, you know, traditional people that would be involved in the environment. I wouldn't be. Look, the football match is on to my left now, but it's such an important issue to me, you know, taking our area in Hill Green away. And I think a lot of people, what I call, you know, I'm part of the silent majority, Ros. You know, I don't want to be involved in these things. I just want to go to work, go home. But unfortunately, you know, these things are causing a lot of upset. And I think whatever your politics, I think, you know, genuinely a lot of people feel like that.
I think you've made some really, really incredibly good points, and I agree with a lot of what you say. I mean, I think it could be a very useful term. I don't know what other people think, but I'd be interested to know.
Well, or we should be thinking of some strap lines, shouldn't we, and that we can use maybe. So that's something perhaps we can think about, Rosie. Thinking of some strap lines that we can adopt and maybe share with Ros for your views, Ros. And yeah. So Dave Lovell, we'll come to you next.
Yeah, hi, I'm from Save Capel in Kent near Tunbridge, but being threatened by Tunbridge Wells. We've had a sort of relatively good success, I think, with the press. We've been on the BBC and we've made the local media, and actually we've been in the Telegraph, and so we haven't done too badly. But that's not really the point, because we're looking to spread our wings a little bit further with other campaigns across Kent. And that's a little bit out of our comfort zone. In brief, the thought that we're having at the moment, just a few campaigns who have been discussing it, is to have a day of action again across Kent about this incessant sort of mass development in the county. Nothing too sort of dramatic, quite benign. It could be, you know, music in a threatened field, or tea on the green, so long as the weather holds out. But the point would be to have it coordinated at the same time on the same day across the county. That goes beyond our sort of media experience or knowledge to try and get interest with that. Clearly, we're not going to get journalists all over the place, so we would hope that anyone involved would take their own photographs that we can sort of cobble together into some form of press release. So really, Ros, my question is, you know, how could we attract media interest on such, you know, on such a day of action, if that comes to being?
Okay, well, can I just ask you whether I mean, what would be your ideal coverage? Would it be local or national, or both?
National.
National.
I mean, local and national. I think the aim behind this is that, you know, we're hearing words from Boris and Gove about Brownfield rather than Greenfield, not the southeast being crammed. Now, whether they mean it or not, I think the idea would be to make them mean it, to crank up the political pressure, even if it's only a small bit, but add to that boiling point where they have to put in writing into policy and guidance what they're saying. So it would be to add to that political pressure.
Okay, I mean, I have to say, I think it's a very good idea, and I think it should definitely attract attention. It could also attract attention because what you're doing is something new. I mean, I guess it is what this group of people are about, and I do identify with this group here. You know, it's actually trying to make links between campaigns that, although ostensibly a little bit different from each other, are actually all fighting the same issue. And I think the idea of a kind of county-wide protest or events or something, or events drawing attention to the fact that this isn't just one, this is happening all over, and that it adds up to something really quite significant. I think that is newsworthy in itself. It is a step forward, as you say, and it is putting pressure on Gove and Johnson, who've come out with these statements that appear to be very, or not very encouraging, but appear to be encouraging. But it is, you know, I think what's good is that you've got a clear target, which is you want them to make them mean it. And you're trying to do things that will get the attention, that will make them mean it, you know. So I would think that actually trying to get, I think it's possible that I would have thought that, you know, the Southeast News would cover that if it was given enough warning, that these, you know, if you've got a date and you're able to give them, you know, a little bit of warning that it's going to happen and it's going to be happening in these different places. I would think that should get coverage and could also get national coverage. You know, again, it would be great to get a kind of a comment writer writing about that in one of the nationals.
Okay, well, I'm just scribbling here, and I'm noticing as I'm sort of looking to the right, there's quite a bit of enthusiasm going on in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you know, this is something that there's a few of us. So it's Save Capel. It's at the moment it's Save Our Heathlands in Lenham, which is in a different borough, but also Save Turndon, which is near Cranbrook, and Friends of East End in Benenden. And it's just a few. I'm going to speak to a couple of other people tomorrow. I didn't want to push this forward as a great idea unless it was a good idea, and that's why I'm really grateful for what you're saying, Ross, and how we can go across and how other people are interested. I think,
Dave,
given the interest that seems to be showing, then I would be quite happy to take, you know, sort of people saying they want to get involved via email. I don't know how we would do that, but
Dave, can you put your email? Dave, sorry to cut across you, but we've got quite a few people with their hands up and some other questions coming through the chat.
Sure.
So I'm conscious of the time. So you could put your email address in the chat,
okay,
and then people can contact you that way, and we can pick up with this, and we can pick up on that initiative outside of this meeting, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Super, thank you. Julian Speed, do you want to come in next?
Thank you very much. I'm the chairman of Linstead with Kingsdown Parish Council near Faversham, which Ros referenced earlier. We've basically been assailed by planning applications right, left and centre, whether it's the local plan or individual developers putting in applications for massive housing estates. Just to pick up quickly, actually, on Dave's point, I think a day of action across Kent is a brilliant idea. There is a fantastic Facebook group called Stop the Destruction of Kent, and it may be that that group could coordinate something like that, because it's a very active group indeed. Picking up on Alistair's point that the media sometimes don't believe the claims of an action group, we've actually been very successful in getting media coverage, but it may be helped by the fact that I'm chairman of the parish council, so I have some sort of perceived status, because I have that role. So it may be that getting the local parish council to support what you're doing and be a spokesman might actually be helpful. The particular question I wanted to raise was, we've had fantastic support from the Kent Messenger Group, so that's Sittingbourne News, Faversham News, and their associated website, which is Kent Online. We've had, I think, 6 or 7 page leads, all very, very supportive of what we're doing. The other main online media outlet in Kent is Kent Live, which is part of Reach PLC, and they have shown absolutely no interest in the subject at all. They've not run a single one of our stories. And I mean, I'm actually a PR consultant by profession, so it's what I do for a living. My understanding is that big construction companies are massive advertisers with Reach PLC, who of course have media outlets right across the country. They're a very big media group, and therefore they have a editorial policy not to write anti-housing stories, because that would, to be blunt, piss off their biggest advertisers and would cause them a real revenue shortfall. I don't know whether there's an answer to this question, but is there any way round that where a media group has an editorial policy to take a particular stance, and that's not the stance that you're trying to put forward?
I mean, I think you're right, and there always has been this worry that the local papers are supported by, you know, the very developers who we're trying to expose. I'm not sure that there is. I think it's got worse because you know, the whole kind of local press is so underfunded now, and so it will be dependent on that area. I don't know. I think it might be. Have you had any direct contact with any of the journalists? You know, have you actually been able to get into conversation with any of them?
I haven't as yet. They've simply ignored everything I've sent them.
Yes, and do you think? I mean, I don't know if they're back in their offices, but it might be worth. Sometimes it is worth phoning them, because, you know, they do still answer the phone occasionally, you know, if you can get through. And I think, you know, what on the local papers, I mean, I'm just glimpsing at the chat, which I apologize, I haven't had much chance to read, but it seems that, you know, people have had some quite bad experiences with the local press. But I think it does make a difference if you can, and again, if you can be quite inventive about what you offer them, you know, come and see it, and come and, you know, we'll take you out on a boat to see the seals that are going to be affected, you know, or something, come and eat in the pub that is going to be now surrounded by these this housing development, you know, to try and get personal contact with them. It just seems to often tip the scales in your favor. But I think in that case, I mean, it is interesting that there is beginning to be a bit of a sort of discourse, as it were, on developers, you know, the kind of, I'm just thinking there was a very good piece in the Observer at the weekend about Isabella Tree having gone to the Conservative Party conference and encountered the developers that are planning to build all around NEP, were basically sponsoring various meetings, and everyone had got the lanyards around their necks of this, and it was a kind of she was very, very articulate about the whole kind of pressures that developers are putting on, you know, on politicians at the moment. And I think there is beginning to be quite a concern about that. And I think that maybe, you know, maybe it has to be addressed directly with the Reach, with your what did you say it was, the Kent Live lot. Maybe you need to sort of address address it directly. It's sometimes the best way, and say we're concerned that we're not able to get our, you know, you haven't been able to speak to us yet, but we would like the chance. And I don't know if that's what you would do in your, if you're professionally involved in this.
I think it's a good way forward, isn't it, Ros? And okay, can we move on to the next question? And if we can you try and be brief, because we've got other questioners and some things in the chat. So Rachel, I think you're next.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for the meeting, and thanks Ros for the really interesting talk. I run a group called Save Newcastle Wildlife up in Newcastle upon Tyne. We've had a very success in the local media, but what my concern is at the moment is an application that's come forward from Newcastle Airport for a solar farm within the green belt, within a wildlife corridor that's already been severed drastically by overdevelopment. So I'm kind of reluctant to, well, because I can see the angle that the press are going to take, you know, campaigning against development for the sake of it, especially with it being renewable energy. So my question was, how can we frame it in a way that will actually get picked up? I know you mentioned before about the biodiversity metric, and this is something that they're trying to deploy as part of the application. So I was just wondering how we can approach it, because whilst I've been listening to the meeting, I've been also drafting a petition, but I'm also conscious of petition fatigue, and, you know, although they're a very useful tool for engaging people, what sort of angle would you suggest that we take against this? Newcastle lost 9% of its green belt when it drew up its local plan in 2015. And we've just lost red squirrels from the nature reserve, which is very close to this site.
Well, I don't want to sort of monopolise, because I've talked too much and other people perhaps have got as strong views. I mean, it does occur to me, because I have mentioned the Faversham Graveney Marshes solar farm, so I know exactly what you're going through, and that was very difficult because, you know, because it was renewable energy, we were cast as being the sort of not just anti-development but anti sort of progressive development.
Yeah,
it was
my concern is as well, the airport very recently developed 175,000 square foot for business development. There was no renewable energy as part of that. And they're saying this is obviously necessary for the airports, the running of the airport. And again, loss of agricultural land is something that isn't factored in to what's going on, all this overdevelopment, all the campaigns that are taking place. I mean, we're not going to be able to eat the houses, or when all the countries that import our food decide that they can't grow enough to support them. So it's good, that and again is another angle. Because all the farmland around that area is moderate to good.
Yes. I think the big issue here is that we're probably not going to be able to look at very specific problems on this call tonight, but some of the things that people have been raising are things that are quite common to lots of us. So perhaps one of the things that we can do, Rosie, and I know that I'm conscious of the time, so we want to wrap up after this question, I think, but maybe we can come back to this topic again, and perhaps have people raise the questions to us, and we can try and come back to this topic again, because so many of the issues around you know, grade 1 and 2 best and most versatile agricultural land, you know, solar farms in inappropriate places and not on top of public buildings, you know. So, you know, we've got so many different issues, but they're repeated all up and down the country. So perhaps there are things that we can do to draw out some key messages that might be able to be used by various different campaigns.
Could I just come in there in relation to what you've just said, because it does occur to me that it's Dave, isn't it? That what Dave was talking about in a day of action for the kind of you know, to unite different developments in Kent who are grappling with the same problem. I mean, it could be interesting because the solar farm issue, I know it's something that's very troubling in Essex as well, that they're a huge level of development in Essex and Cambridgeshire, aren't they? And obviously the Kent one, now what Rachel is talking about, you know, that actually maybe there's something to be gained from actions that unite different campaigns that are on dealing with the same issue, so that would project it to another level, which is, you know, why aren't their requirements for developments to have renewable energy, you know, why is it being allowed on good quality agricultural land? Can biodiversity gain really offset this? No, but you know, it might be a way. I guess that's what you're saying, coming back to this subject to see if there are ways in which campaigns affected by the same pressures might unite to do something slightly different by being together.
Yeah, and at least have some common messages that can run through various press releases or other media tools.
Actually, Marge, I was just thinking, so we can start from what we submitted today. So the Oxford-Cambridge ARC consultation finished today, and we submitted a response, and the response basically didn't say anything about the ARC specifically, but it gave basically several pages worth of sort of criteria for things that we felt needed to be in place for any sort of growth within any area broadly. But we could maybe work from that, Marge, and start to create some templates from that.
Yeah.
Now look, it's 21:31. I have to go because my daughter's informed me there's a massive spider in her room and she won't go to bed till I've removed it. So I need to leave you all. What I'm wondering is, Ros, there's a few questions I think still outstanding. If people email me a few, would you maybe have time to look at those and give a few bullet point suggestions to them if they're needing advice?
Yes, absolutely. Very happy to. I'm sorry I'm not able to read the chat at the same time.
No, it's hard to read the chat at the same time, but I think it's been a fabulous session, Ros. Thank you so much. I think everybody's enjoyed it.
Well, I hope if you want to, you know, continue it as a discussion next time or something, I'd be happy to
come back again.
Come again.
That'd be really good, actually. And another thing we've talked about is whether we have Facebook open events, which you can host live events. So it could be we could get you on Facebook maybe and just take questions from people. That's another way to do it. So yeah, that's really kind. Thank you.
Okay, so please, anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask, I'm very happy to be approached, and I'll see what see if I can respond helpfully.
Thank you so much. So I've put my email, I've put the Community Planning Alliance email into the chat. So if you just forward emails to there, then I can consolidate them and then I can give them all to Ros in one batch rather than millions. So thank you all, and we'll see you all soon. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.